Stephanie Slater, the Birmingham estate agent who was kidnapped by Michael Sams in 1992, is the focus of a new Channel 5 documentary. The second episode of the program, titled The Girl in the Box, The Kidnapping of Stephanie Slater, airs tonight, March 1 at 9 p.m. The police officer who finally caught Britain's once most wanted man, Michael Sams, after he murdered one woman and held another hostage in 1991 and 1992, has revealed chilling details about his arrest. Detective Sergeant Tim Grogan has recalled how Sams was calm and cheerful as police walked into his workshop in Newark, Notts, to arrest him for the kidnap and murder of Julie Dart, 18, and the kidnap of Stephanie Slater, then 25, after he held each woman hostage locked up in a box for several days. Speaking to the Mirror ahead of a Channel 5 documentary about Sams's gruesome crimes, he said, "All this time we've been searching for this chap who's outwitted West Midlands police. He's killed, and he was prepared to kill again." He added he was shocked to discover the culprit was a shambling, one-legged man, with a limp he believes was accentuated as the person who had been committing horrific crimes under the radar for several months. Recalling Sams's arrest ahead of The Girl in the Box, The Kidnapping of Stephanie Slater, which airs on Channel 5 at 9 p.m. tonight and tomorrow, D.S. Grogan revealed the moment the killer realized he was being charged with serious crimes, at which point his chipper demeanor faded fast. The blood drained through his face, the cop recalled, adding that his apparent vulnerability meant it was the best time to interview him in the hope he would reveal as much information as possible. West Midlands police were left stumped after the body of 18-year-old Julie Dart was discovered in July 1991 and began their hunt for her killer. Days earlier, the sadistic murderer had picked up Ms. Dart in the Chapeltown area of Leeds while cruising through the red light district searching for a victim. Ms. Dart had turned to prostitution to clear her debts so she could pursue her dream of an army career, having passed the medical and other assessment tests. After she got into his car, Sams drove the terrified teenager 70 miles to his workshop in Nottinghamshire. After leaving Julie locked up overnight, Sams returned to his workshop and ordered her to write letters to her boyfriend and mother, Lynn, telling them that she was being held and urging them to contact police. Sams himself also wrote a threatening letter to West Midlands police, demanding $140,000 for the safe return of the teenager. Officers attempted to comply, and a policewoman with a hold-all containing the cash was sent on Sams's instructions to various locations, but all attempts at the handover failed. Shortly afterwards, he killed Julie. A post-mortem examination of Julie's body, which was found trussed up in a sheet and ropes under an oak tree in Easton, Lincolnshire, 10 days after her disappearance, revealed that Sams had strangled the life out of her by crushing her windpipe with his bare hands. He kept her body for a week in a green wheelie bin before transporting her decomposing remains to his chosen dumping ground. "When I read that letter Julie had written when she was in desperate need, knowing she was going to die, it's a heart-rending letter," he said. D.S. Grogan revealed his regrets after reading Julie's letter that police were unable to save her. 6 months later, Sams would adapt his methods for his next crime, abducting Stephanie Slater at knife point while posing as a house buyer in Birmingham and imprisoning her in a wheelie bin in the same workshop. Although her disappearance prompted a huge manhunt, Sams evaded police and escaped with a $175,000 ransom, although incredibly, he kept his promise and returned Stephanie to her loved ones after receiving the money. Stephanie later revealed in a memoir that she had been raped during her ordeal, in which Sams had held her hostage in a locked wheelie bin for several days. However, D.S. Grogan and his team were left frustrated that they had not managed to catch Sams, despite a carefully orchestrated operation in which they had arranged for the ransom to be paid by Stephanie's boss. The plan was to intercept the handover and arrest Sams, but poor weather conditions meant they lost him. He was later caught following a BBC Crime Watch appeal when Sams's ex-wife Susan Oakey recognized the clues provided and linked Stephanie's case to her former husband. Sams was convicted in July 1993 and sentenced to life in prison. He is now 80 years old, making him one of the UK's oldest prisoners, and is said to be applying for parole next month. In 2005, he was given an extra 8 years for attacking a female probation officer with a metal spike. 2 years ago, the parole board ruled that he was still too dangerous to be released. Stephanie subsequently worked with police to help improve the treatment of kidnapped victims, but died of cancer in 2017, aged just 50. Monster Sam's held his frightened victim for ransom while raping and locking her in a makeshift wheelie bin coffin. Her workplace Shipways estate agents paid a ransom of $175,000 to Sams, who then released Stephanie after 8 days. It was a crime that rocked Birmingham, with the public grasping for any updates on the manhunt for the murderer and kidnapper. Sams was eventually locked up, sentenced to 4 life sentences, partly thanks to Stephanie revealing every speck of information she could on her captor. Now, over 30 years later, Plimmer reflected on the legacy of Slater's bravery. But in a world of smartphones and social media, can women still walk alone outside unharmed? Stephanie Slater was kept captive by killer Michael Sams in 1992 after being held at knife point during a house viewing on Turnberry Road, but was freed after the ransom was paid. Ms. Slater, who died age 50, later helped to convict Sams of the 1991 murder of 18-year-old Julie Dart by giving evidence at Nottingham Crown Court, telling how she was held blindfolded in a makeshift coffin. "I was very upset when I heard Stephanie was seriously ill," he said. "The last time I saw her on the Isle of Wight to do some filming a few years ago, she was quite upbeat and positive. She could sometimes be hysterically funny and had many passions. She was mad about space and astronomy, and once we took her to do some filming at Jodrell Bank Radio Telescope, which she absolutely loved." Mr. Wilkinson added that the crimes committed against Ms. Slater also had an awful impact on her parents. After her ordeal, she worked with police forces across the country to help them understand how to treat kidnapped victims, also working with victims themselves to help them overcome their experiences. A police spokesman said, "West Midlands. Police would also like to pay tribute to Stephanie's courage and bravery over the years, and for the work she did in helping police officers and victims by sharing her experience." Speaking in 2011, Ms. Slater said of her kidnapping, "Before this happened, I had a boyfriend, a job, and a company car. I had loads of friends and a great social life. But he, Sams, took everything and destroyed the next 20 years of my life. But now I am ready to begin again. Most people begin their lives in their 20s or 30s, but those years of my life were destroyed." Her adoptive mother died several years ago, and her adoptive father died last year. Sams, now aged 76 and originally from West Yorkshire, was given a life sentence in July 1993 after being found guilty of the murder and kidnap of Ms. Dart and 2 attempts to blackmail police. She never had a long-term relationship in the years following her kidnapping. "She never felt clean, and she used to shower multiple times a day," Ms. Kettner said. "She would scrub herself until she was red raw. She would change her clothes multiple times a day." Observing this and seeing how this girl who had been this wonderful, vivacious person, to see she was broken was so difficult. Ultimately, she never recovered. She kind of became a hermit. She didn't want to go anywhere or see anybody. In an interview she gave with the BBC prior to her death, Ms. Slater said she had even struggled to use a wheelie bin, wouldn't have one in the house at first because "that's what Sams kept me in," she said. "The horror never goes away. I've rebuilt my life to a certain extent, but there are still bits of me that I've lost. You go on Facebook and you look at your friends and you see they have moved on, had children. I'm still here. I'm still on my own. I'm still single. You do feel quite cheated." Stephen Regal, a trauma therapist who has worked with survivors of trauma both in the NHS and with Victim Support Homicide Service, said that while Stephanie had told her story over and over in interviews and in presentations she did with the police, she had probably not come to terms with it. "People get used to telling their stories, and it's a third-person narrative," he said. "They're not really processing what happened. I guess when she's telling her story over and over again, there's an element of detachment. If she were here now, I would say that if you were to sit down with her, she would probably meet a diagnosis of PTSD." After receiving the ransom and releasing her, Sams, a toolmaker who had married 3 times, avoided arrest until his first wife recognized his voice from a telephone recording played on BBC's Crime Watch. Sams pleaded guilty to kidnapping and imprisoning Slater and making a $175,000 ransom demand on her employers. Slater later helped convict him of the 1991 murder of Julie Dart, 18, from Leeds. In her evidence at Nottingham Crown Court, Slater told how she had attempted to befriend him to make it more difficult for him to harm her. She wrote a book, Beyond Fear, My Will to Survive, about her time in captivity, and worked with police forces to improve the treatment of kidnapped victims and also with victims to help them cope after their ordeal. Slater, who lived on the Isle of Wight, said in 2011, "Before this happened, I had a boyfriend, a job, and a company car. I had loads of friends and a great social life. But he, Sams, took everything and destroyed the next 20 years of my life. But now I am ready to begin again. Most people begin their lives in their 20s and 30s, but those years of my life were destroyed." Sams, now 76, and originally from Keighley, West Yorkshire, was given a life sentence in July 1993 after being convicted of the murder and kidnap of Dart and 2 attempts to blackmail police. In a statement on Friday, Stacey Kettner said of her best friend, "We have had a unique and epic friendship for over 25 years and shared so much together, good and bad times. I know that she truly never got over the events that shaped her life so dramatically in January 1992. West Midlands Police also paid tribute to Stephanie's courage and bravery over the years and for the work she did in helping police officers and victims by sharing her experience. Slater's adoptive mother died several years ago, and her adoptive father died last year. So how did Stephanie end up working on behalf of women who have been through traumatic crimes and the sometimes harrowing police investigations? Following her release, Sams took Stephanie home, dropping her 2 streets from her front door. He pulled up the car. He said, "I'm sorry about everything. You were the innocent victim," she recalled in a later interview. Then he said, "Don't look back at the car. I fell out onto the pavement and the door shut behind me, and he drove off at speed. When I opened my eyes, I was partially blind. The pressure of the blindfold for 8 days and nights had damaged my eyes. All I could see were the swirling orange street lamps, and I could hardly walk." Somehow, she staggered back to the home she shared with her parents and rang the bell. "A guy opened the door and I didn't recognize him," she said. "I thought I had come to the wrong house. It turned out he was my mom and dad's family liaison officer. He had been there for 8 days, but had never seen a photograph of me, so he didn't recognize me. Over his shoulder, my dad appeared and screamed, 'It's Stephanie. Stephanie's back,' and he hauled me into the porch." Seeing her father's reaction, the officer then, shockingly, blocked her from hugging her parents due to the risk of contaminating forensic evidence. In a later interview, she recalled, "He pushed me to the back of the room, sat me in a chair and said, 'You stay there. Don't touch the arms of the chair. You sit there and don't do anything.' I was absolutely terrified. I was thinking, 'Dear God, what is going on?' The reality of it is, you are back from a terrible ordeal, and you see your mom or dad, and you want to hold them or hug them. To a police officer, you are a walking crime scene. I had fibers and things all stuck to me and whatever else. But I should never have been denied just a hold of a hand to know that I was home." Best friend Stacey Kettner said Stephanie confided in her about what happened next. "The room was cleared and a police surgeon, or whoever they called, made her get undressed in her own living room on this big sheet of brown paper," Stacey said. "I remember that the door from their living room had frosted glass, so she could see there were people on the other side of that door, so she felt exposed. She had long hair, and it was matted. The police had a kind of tick sheet, and the doctor was going, 'Right, take some blood.' There was no empathy. It was kind of, 'Right, next thing.' They pulled some hair out without saying that it was what going to happen. They took her hand and cut her nails. Nothing was explained to her. There was no gentleness." On top of this, a deal struck between the police and media not to publish details of the kidnap meant Stephanie was put in front of a press conference less than 12 hours after being released, and before she had been officially interviewed by officers. While Stephanie mostly cooperated with police, giving dozens of statements, she refused one suggestion: to reenact her kidnapping to see if it would jog her memory of events. Stacy said the psychological strain of Stephanie's ordeal and a wish to protect her mother led to her initially not telling police she had been raped by Sams. Through all of this, she did not have any counseling, leaving her and her family to deal with the aftermath alone. She fled to the Isle of Wight and, for a while, broken. Stephanie struggled with building a new life. However, being introduced to a police officer unexpectedly led to a new role. Stacy recalled, "He was like, oh gosh, it would have been so interesting during training to talk to someone or hear about this from someone who has experienced this." He asked if she would be interested in talking to some police trainees, and she said, "That's fine." Despite her work, recent cases such as the killings of Zara Alina, Sabina Nessa, and Sarah Everard have highlighted the fact that women remain far from safe as they go about their daily lives. The family of Susie Lampla, who, like Stephanie, is believed to have been kidnapped during the course of her work as an estate agent, has long campaigned on the issue. Susie's brother, Richard, works alongside the Susie Lamplug Trust and feels progress on safety since Stephanie's abduction has been mixed. Today, there is a lot more surveillance and more legislation, but it hasn't stopped men doing this, which you would have hoped they would, he said. But there must be something that keeps men, in particular, wanting to do this sort of thing, which is terrible. I've always said I wish we could wind the trust up, but it's still needed out there. Sams remains in prison after being jailed for life in 1993. He has twice been turned down for parole, most recently in 2022,